This week on The Futurists, Dan Schwarz.
Forecasting the future of technology is unbelievably hard, as I'm sure you know, Robert, better than most. So we said, okay, we need more. We need more intelligence. And of course, the source of new intelligence is not throw more humans at the problem. It's put some AI on it. And that's where we are now.
Hey there, welcome back to The Futurist. I'm Rob Tersick, and this week I am solo. Brett King was planning to join, but at the last moment got pulled away. As you may know, if you listen to the show frequently, Brett's often on the road, so the guy has a lot of demands on his time. But he set me up with a great interview today. I'm going to be speaking to someone who's thinking very deeply about the future, and in particular the future of AI, by evaluating the performance of various AI models and their business models as well, and among them many other things. So let me give a warm introduction to Dan Schwarz. Dan, welcome to The Futurist. Thanks for joining us today on the show.
Thank you for having me, Robert.
Dan, tell us a little bit about FutureSearch. It's a relatively new organization, and I think probably a lot of folks are not familiar with it.
Yeah, we are a seed stage startup. We're a little bit less than 2 years old. We are predicting the future using AI. And we got started shortly after GPT-4 came out when we realized that this was now possible. Prior to FutureSearch, I was the CTO of Metaculus, which is the preeminent human forecasting platform. And for that, I built and ran the prediction market that is currently running inside Google. So I was very, very interested in how we can predict the future. And up until 2 years ago, the answer was, how do we get the best information out of human beings? And now the question is, how do we get the best information out of AI? And that's what FutureSearch is doing.
Very cool. And so if folks go to the website, it's FutureSearch.ai, because actually there's a couple different things that turn up if you search it on Google. So it's important to put the .ai at the end if you're going to go to that site. You'll find research reports and some news. And I was actually quite interested to see the information that you've been sharing on LinkedIn. Folks, if you find Dan on LinkedIn, then you'll be able to see some of his recent reports, for instance, about the business model of OpenAI and so on. I was surprised you were able to get that information because that's not readily available even from news publications.
That's right. And it was last summer when we were the first to basically figure out their business model, like where the revenue was coming from ChatGPT Consumer and Enterprise and from the API, when none of that information was public. And the main way we were able to do that was using our forecasting techniques. To be great at forecasting, you have to work with information you don't have because the future is fundamentally unknowable. So you have to kind of triangulate data sources, you have to estimate, you have to infer, you have to make probabilistic inferences. But if you get enough data and you have good enough judgment, you can make pretty good probabilistic inferences. And those projections that we made last summer about OpenAI held out very, very well when more data came in. That gives us more confidence that our methodology is working and hopefully gives our audience and customers some confidence when they look at our analysis that we're more likely to be right than your average analyst or reporter on the topic.
So that's really interesting. So that report that you published, you didn't do that in cooperation with OpenAI. You didn't get access to any inside information at that company. You simply had your AI system evaluate trends and then make forecasts and predictions based on that information.
With plenty of humans, too. Despite what I said before about AI being the main place to mine for insights about the future, of course, humans are still king, just not for that long. 2 years ago, it was purely a human intelligence game. The last 2 years, it's been hybrid human AI intelligence, and now we are starting to see the pure AI intelligence part come to its own element. I'm a longtime chess player, and this is kind of the main way that we think about the relation between humans and AI. Many decades of just humans, then this period of time for about 10 or 20 years where it was humans and AI working together, and then we got to the point where it was only AI, and humans have basically nothing left to say about the game of chess. Predicting the future is much, much harder than playing chess, much, much harder, but I think it will follow that same shape. So we'll be in this era where we have human AI pairing, and then we'll be in the AI-only world before too long.
Well, that's quite interesting. There was research republished today by Gary Marcus, who's a notable critic, or I should say critical thinker about AI. He's well known for debunking some of the more outrageous claims made by OpenAI. And he published research today that said even the reasoning models that OpenAI has been promoting so heavily recently, he said even those reasoning models are subject to deception. And he gave some examples where they were citing known publications that are disinformation sites, particularly the Pravda network in Russia. where if you ask the reasoning models, the OpenAI reasoning models, they will tell you all about this Pravda network, and it's well understood by the AI that this is a disinformation network. But then again, if you ask other questions, it starts to show up as credible information, and so it's easy to fool these systems today. Tell me a little bit about that, because you made a prediction that someday, perhaps soon, machines will be reasoning better than humans, and I would say that Gary Marcus would probably differ with you on that. So how do you respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, Gary's a smart guy, but I think he disagrees with myself and many other people who are more of a believer, not necessarily in the present state of these models, but in the velocity and maybe even the acceleration of their quality. Yeah, that question is very interesting. I don't think the research definitively answers this, but the best of my understanding is that a lot of the citing of incredible sources comes from post-training. For a while, hallucinations were such a huge problem for using LLMs for almost anything that the reward for not hallucinating but citing your evidence was extremely high. And so models got in the habit of citing whatever they could find. It's not just Pravda, by the way. A lot of future search runs, we have to, go and tune them because they will pull up things like market research reports that are superficially credible, but any expert looking at them will tell that this is just some intern who just put a bunch of numbers into a spreadsheet. It's not like credible research.
And are the AIs capable of making that discernment, or does that require human intervention?
That's a tough problem. It is somewhat capable. Like you said, if you just ask ChatGPT, is Pravda a credible source? It will tell you it's not, but then it will go cite it, exactly as you said, Robert. So some of this is just kind of the engineering of the intelligence of what is a credible source is there. You just have to elicit it out of the model. But part of it is that you just need to have good epistemics for your reasoning more generally. And it's not just hallucinations, and it's not just, using sources that are not credible. There's a million ways you can go wrong in your reasoning chains. And Gary Marcus is right that if you want to get high quality research, just asking ChatGPT, even with O3 or Grok 4, which came out yesterday, or whatever you want, is not that great. But that's like going to one human you just meet on the street, or a single consultant you hire, and saying, just tell me what's going to happen with OpenAI, and just believing everything they tell you. That would be a crazy thing to do. One of the things about coming to forecasting from studying humans before doing it as AI is that humans are incredibly bad at almost every forecasting task. Like, they also hallucinate and make stuff up that is not, they just remember something, but it turns out to be fake. They will also cite bad sources that they shouldn't cite. They will make deductive errors, they make inductive errors, they will omit critical information. And so the best way to get information out of humans is to have like really expert humans and to work with them for a long period of time and to have them work in teams.
Yeah,
And that
that's right.
still is fraught and still leads to errors. So the idea that we just take an off-the-shelf AI, just ask it one thing and say, it failed, therefore AI is not trustworthy. It's like, have you talked to humans? Like, humans are terrible at these tasks. Really, it's just a complicated engineering and orchestration problem to get good information writ large from humans, from AI, or from humans working with AI.
It's I'm laughing because, of course, you're on a show called The Futurists, where we talk to forecasters and people who make bold predictions all the time, and it's true. And even here, we have the challenge of screening out charlatans, people who make, basically they take a shot from the hip. There is a style of futurists who I call them entertainment futurists, because they make the kinds of forecasts that sound really plausible, and they're super interesting scenarios, and they present it in such a credible fashion because they speak boldly with confidence that they can persuade a lot of people that may be true, or that may be likely. And sometimes I'm listening to these folks and I think to myself, this guy's completely making it up. Like, because it's not based on anything credible. Or you're right, like a superficial search across the web and pulling up a couple research reports and then using that to extrapolate some scenario. Typically when we do scenario planning for organizations, we'll present a range of scenarios, weighted probabilities about what we believe might happen, and our reasoning for that. And very often there's variability with each of those, right? So it's never really that certain. It's very difficult, as you said in the beginning. The future doesn't exist. It's not like a book that's been written and you're just guessing the next page. It's a range of probabilities. That's the only, all that exists is the present moment and what we understand about the past, and the rest of it is to come. How do you present that information, and how do your clients get value from it?
Yeah, it's a great question, Robert. And yeah, you as a futurist who've worked with other futurists, I think you probably understand this better than I do. Um, I'll point you to an example. We contributed some of the forecast to the AI 2027 report that came out a couple months ago. Robert, did you read that one?
No, I didn't.
I would encourage you and your audience to check out AI 2027. It is a very, very well crafted scenario of how a hard AI takeoff could happen in the next couple of years. And the answer to your question, Robert, is that it does all of it. So we contributed the forecast, just kind of the hard-nosed quantitative modeling plus putting in judgment, all the forecasting techniques we have at our disposal to just get the most accurate answer we can to when will certain milestones be reached. With the first one being, when will AI be so good at coding that it massively speeds up the coding that happens in the frontier labs that are developing AI? And then there's a series of milestones that happen after that. But if you read it, it's two scenarios. It's very long. It's an hour or two to read, and there's kind of an accompanying graphic on the side that shows you the progress that is, manifesting in society. It talks about the technology, it talks about the politics, it talks about US-China relationships, it talks about the actual development of the models, and tries to synthesize all of that into a coherent whole. AI 2027 is very, very ambitious. I loved it. Some people loved it. Some people really didn't like. Even Vitalik Buterin just actually made a critique of it just yesterday that I thought was really interesting. So I wouldn't claim to have the best answer to how to turn information about the future into something persuasive. I think there's many different audiences who want many different types of things. I think my main claim is that we should try harder. Like we should make better scenarios, like you said, make them probabilistic. Like we should back them with quantitative models.
Yeah.
And then from the future search and Metaculus perspective, we should trust people who have a better track record. Like if people go and say things and those things turn out to be good, we should listen to them more. If people go and say things and those things turn out to be wrong, we should listen to them less.
It's astounding to me in media how many pundits are wrong consistently, and yet they still appear on television. It's almost like the audiences for this information, at least when it comes to like broadcasting and mass media, the audiences seem to prefer someone who tells them a familiar tale, or the tale that they expect, or an exciting tale, rather than anything that's close to accurate. And there's no penalty. It seems there's no accountability for people who are egregiously wrong again and again and again on television, where it's recorded and you can show the evidence that they have been wrong consistently. I'm not going to name names right now, but there are plenty of examples, particularly in the markets and finance.
But it's not necessarily a lost cause. I think the Tetlock school of forecasting that is done in tournaments with resolutions and probabilities and Breyer scores, it's only about 10 or 15 years old. I think it's still a little bit slow in getting adopted into the wider, even the finance community, which really they have a lot of money on the line. You think they would take this more seriously, and they frequently don't. But this is changing, and I think AI is actually accelerating that change because AI makes things a lot more transparent. Because when an AI gives you some information, it comes with a big old rationale. It comes with models. You can read it. You can ask follow-up questions. You can get much more information about what that AI did. When you talk to humans, the kind of human judgment that is behind these forecasts is often quite messy, and often the human themselves won't know. They'll say, well, I just have a sense that OpenAI is ahead, and they won't be able to really justify that.
True.
So AI is making everything more transparent. It's giving reasoning chains and numbers and models and citations to all sorts of types of things we didn't used to have. And so I think the demand, especially from the financial community, for more rigor is accelerating, and I think for the rest of the world too.
Wait, Dan, that's one of the reasons why we started the show a long time ago when Brett and I got started here. We said, the world needs more people who can think athletically about the future. Even if you're wrong, I make fun of the people who make mistakes when they predict or prognosticate. But the fact is, it's a good habit to be thinking about the future. It's also a very good habit to keep track of your forecast so that you can see how frequently you're wrong. Because a lot of people fall into that kind of cognitive bias where they think that they're more frequently right. I would guess most people are not correct in their forecasts more than half the time. I feel happy if my forecasts are right 50% of the time. I feel like I'm doing fantastically well relative to most people. Now, you brought up Philip Tetlock, and for the folks who are listening, it's important to know about super forecasting. Tetlock is a psychologist who developed a methodology. First, he became interested in the ability of people to forecast and why can some folks do it better than others, and discovered that some people suffer from cognitive biases that make it impossible for them to make a good forecast. And then he started to study those who were what he calls super forecasters, who are highly accurate, and began to kind of extrapolate their habits. And one of the habits that he cites in the book, Super Forecasting, is the ability to read broadly across multiple sources. And the converse of that is the people who only read in a certain bubble. For a simple example would be the left and the right in the political spectrum in any democracy, not just the United States. We're so polarized right now, and we're so overloaded with information that we tend to see the same headlines. We tend to see the same stories repeated again and again and again. So if you only graze on one side of the political divide or the other for your news information, then you're likely to start to form an impression, a kind of consensus impression that may have nothing to do with reality. And anyone who's in the United States right now, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So unfortunately, we tend to say, well, that's a problem on the right, or people on the right will say that's a problem on the left. The reality is that the news media today, in order to garner an audience and get attention, has to come up with extreme scenarios and grabber headlines and clickbait. And so as a result, it's all pretty extreme. When you dig a little past the headlines, the reality is not that extreme. Now, this becomes problematic if that's shaping your view of the present, because it's going to change the way you think about the future. So what Philip Tetlock would recommend is to aggressively investigate the views on the opposite side of the political fence or on any issue. It doesn't have to just be politics. His point is that the people who have that habit of reading broadly across the spectrum, they tend to make highly accurate forecasts because they have a richer information diet. Now, in your work, Dan, I'm sure this is a factor when you're working with artificial intelligence. It's probably the same thing, right? Garbage in, garbage out is a famous classic computer program. We do see that. The example we gave about Pravda Network, for example, you can fool an AI. So one approach is to use multiple AIs, double check, or take the results from one and feed it into another and see if you can get a better check. Tell me about some of the methodologies that you use to ensure that you're getting balanced information and credible sources so that your forecasts are more likely to be accurate.
Yeah. And just to say that the fact that breadth of research is so important really gives you a signal that AI is going to help you a lot here, because going deep with AI is very hard, as anyone who's used ChatGPT knows. But going broad with AI is almost baked in. Like, it will definitely read more articles than you could ever read and figure out all of those angles that you can never figure out. Its synthesis and its judgment and its incredulousness, it's not clear that it has. I wouldn't say it's stronger than that. It is clearly below human intelligence and judgment. But it can definitely read more than you. So to the extent that that insight from Tetlock holds up, which I think it does, you immediately can see how incredibly useful AI can be for forecasting, even though if you just ask it a forecasting question, it's going to do pretty badly on its own. So the main technique that we use at FutureSearch is detecting the errors. So we put out a benchmark called Deep Research Bench. There's a lot of tools called Deep Research out there right now. Claude has one called Research, Grok has one called Deep Search, and then OpenAI and Gemini have something called Deep Research. And it will do this. It will read 50, 100 articles on your question, even very technical, very difficult questions. Like, you want to know about troop movements in Ukraine, or you want to know about a new drug's impact on the human gut. Very, very technical questions. It will just read everything for you. And the question is, how good is its output on those tricky questions? Nobody had built a benchmark of this before. Nobody actually knew how well these things were researching these topics. So we decided, look, in order to make our systems better at this, step one is to be able to evaluate it. And once we did that, we realized we should probably share this benchmark with other folks so they should know if they're going to go to ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude or Grok 4, what to expect. The evals from just yesterday is that Grok 4 does seem to be a better LLM for this type of research, even though it just came out, compared to O3 or Gemini 2.5 or Claude Sonnet 4. And the way that we verified that is just very carefully working out the correct answer to questions that require web research. So we have tasks like validating claims, finding numbers, compiling data sets. We use humans. We very, very carefully work out what the correct answer is. And then the other technique is we freeze the internet. So when you ask a question that requires searching the internet's changing all the time. So if you ask it again tomorrow, how will you know? The information might have changed. There might be more information. Some information might have been removed. So we freeze chunks of the internet that are relevant for these questions to build like a proper test environment. So if you ask some question about the human gut or Ukraine troop movements or whatever, we know what's in there. So we know how good the researcher is. We're holding the internet constant. And the thing we're changing is the quality of the researcher. And this benchmark does show that AI models are getting dramatically better at this type of work, but they are still clearly subhuman. A human carefully working out an answer to a question like this, who is skilled and calibrated and patient, will get a better answer than any deep research tool currently on the web. But the gap is closing.
That's quite a bold statement. Tell me about that gap, and tell me, how long can humans take comfort in the fact that we're able to outperform in this one domain?
Yeah, again, it's tricky because humans have such massive variation. So I'm talking about like really great humans. And for me, as a forecaster, a great human is someone who scores really well in forecasting tournaments. We work with some of the most calibrated, most accurate forecasters on planet Earth. And we ask them to do this research and kind of work out what the correct answer is. We know they won't always get the right answer, but they will always have good uncertainty. Like, what they know, they know. What they don't know, and they don't confuse those things. And that is an incredibly rare skill, as I'm sure you know. So by working out those answers, we have a sense of what the frontier is. Of course, the typical human who's asked some question about the human gut is going to get it much worse than ChatGPT. The question is if you really care. And this is for something, for the investor community. If you want to make a bet on AI, you really want to know what you're talking about. AI is very, very messy right now. We're talking about getting the quality of evidence that would be useful for making million or billion dollar decisions. For there, you're not asking like what would the typical human do. You're not asking like what would one prompt for ChatGPT do. You're asking what is the best possible answer to this question that I could get. And that's, deep research is one attempt at that, ChatGPT's deep research mode and Gemini's deep research mode. But there's new ones, with the Grok 4 Heavy has its own claims about being more epistemically virtuous than other models. Do those things hold up under scrutiny? That's what the benchmark tells us. And then you get the sense of what the frontier is.
Now, I noticed on your website that companies like OpenAI and Amazon are customers, and Google, I think, as well. So even though you're benchmarking these companies, and in some cases, what you're telling me right now is some of the models don't perform as well as others, yet these companies are quite interested in getting your research. So are you creating a kind of like, I don't know, Nielsen rating or Billboard top 10 chart for AI performance? Is that kind of like, is it becoming an industry standard?
I would hope so. I think these benchmarks are quite important, and FutureSearch is very happy to contribute Deep Research Bench. We have another benchmark on our site too. You can see that this is specifically about forecasting using the same technique. We call it past casting, basically freezing slices of the internet such that you can forecast from the perspective of the past and get the answer right away. It's a technique that's only available to AIs because once a human learns something, you can't forecast it again. You just know the answer. But AIs have training window cutoffs, and you can restrict the information they have access to and say, given these inputs, could you predict what will happen next, like in real world problems? So yes, I think these benchmarks are very important, and we're very happy to have the Frontier AI Labs be customers of ours. They're sometimes buy research on each other, which is, kind of an interesting use case for us. But generally speaking, FutureSearch is about the software. It's not about the benchmarks, and it's not about the human intelligence. Other people have benchmarks. Plenty of other people have human intelligence. It's the ability to train against those benchmarks and make software that just makes better epistemic decisions, that is just less likely to cite Pravda and more likely to have calibrated judgment in its output. That's what is of the commercial value that FutureSearch is going for. So we're very happy to sell this kind of AI human hybrid research. We do just want the best possible answer to questions, and if that requires humans, we'll use humans. But again, we're moving to a world where AI is going to eclipse the ability for humans to meaningfully add judgment on these very, very complicated problems. And it's the software that is our business.
Great. On that note, I'm going to take a little break. We'll be back in just a moment. We have to have a word from our sponsors. You're listening to The Futurists, and our guest this week is Dan Schwarz. We'll be right back after this. Hi, this is Rob Tursik from the Futurist podcast, which is part of the Provoked Media Network. I'm excited to tell you about some news. The Futurist is expanding into the real world. We're doing a live event in Dubai. Now, folks who listen to the Futurist podcast, you're going to be familiar with the fact that my co-host Brett King has been working very hard in Dubai and other parts of the Middle East for a long time. And for more than a year, he's been putting together this event. And now, with the help and support of MasterCard and Emirates MBD and many other partners, we are putting together the world's largest futurist meeting in Dubai. It will take place at the fabulous Jumeirah Beach Hotel in Dubai, and it'll be on the September 22nd and 23rd this year. So just a few weeks from now. The speakers are going to include some of the world's leading futurists and forecasters and future thinkers, people like Brian Cox and astronaut Scott Kelly. Of course, Brett and I will be there to conduct interviews and introduce some of the other folks. We've got speakers from around the world. And if you're interested in meeting futurists in person and participating in an event that attracts the future-minded, please join us on the 22nd and 23rd of September. You can learn more about it at futuristevent.com. That's futurist singular event.com. It's all one word, futuristevent.com. And that'll tell you all about the event. I sure hope to see you there in Dubai on the 22nd and 23rd of September. Thanks. Hey there, welcome back to The Futurist. I'm Rob Tursik, and this week I'm talking to Dan Schwarz, who is the co-founder and CEO of FutureSearch.ai. And we've been having a lively conversation so far about forecasting methodologies and how they're changing in the time of artificial intelligence. And I want to come back to a question. You touched on your background at Metaculus. So before you started this company, you were at a company called Metaculus, which is a human forecasting organization. Can you give me a contrast between that methodology, human forecasting, and then what you're doing differently today with AI? And I realize some of this might be a little bit redundant, so skip that part. But the contrast is what I'm interested in. Like, what's new? What's novel?
Absolutely. So even though I'm mostly excited about the use of AI in forecasting, I think the use of humans in forecasting is still really poorly understood. Part of the reason that I, as a technologist, got interested in it is because I saw how much better we could be doing just with humans. This is in 2019. I was very interested in forecasting in prediction markets, not really in anything else, but just prediction markets. I thought prediction markets were totally fascinating. The idea that you could take betting as the mechanism in order to get accuracy out of humans. I was at Google at the time. I was actually working at Waymo on the self-driving car. Google has a history of this. In 2005, they released, well, not released, they had an internal prediction market. It was called Profit, but it was written about in the New York Times, and there was a Harvard Business School review of it. They called it Google's lunchtime betting game. And Google employees, who in 2005 were very sharp, would bet about things like how many users will we have, how much revenue will we have, what will happen in this office, what will
Wow.
happen with our competitor, and filter that information up to senior management. The project ran for 4 or 5 years and was shut down. I've written a little bit about that and what worked about it and what didn't. But inside Google, reading about it and seeing all the internal documentation and the code, I was thinking, wow, that actually works. Like building a betting market so that people could bet on outcomes actually just gives better information to managers. The managers don't forecast by just kind of looking at it and using their guts. They could basically have a very sophisticated poll of all the people working on the project and use that to inform their decisions.
And often, surprisingly, that kind of poll, if you have a big enough sample size or a big enough number of participants, they're surprisingly accurate. They come within 1 or 2 percentage points of accuracy, even though some of the individual answers might range quite far. Do you think that's going to be improved upon? Or is that going to be an input in the future?
Yeah. So I'll try to say a little bit more about what that frontier is. How good of forecasting I was able to achieve with the prediction market running at Google and then the forecasting platform at Metaculus, which is public. So, it's even open source. So you can go and look and see what is everybody forecasting, what are the track records and accuracy scores. It's a bit technical, but all that information is out there. And yeah, the reason I was so excited about it, I was just kind of a normal technologist. The reason I got so excited about it is because the accuracy scores were just very high. And this is kind of the Tetlock school. Reading those papers and seeing what some of his super forecasters were able to do that you were talking about in the last segment, Robert, it's astounding. I think that most people's view is that the future is just totally unknowable. Like basically everything is 50-50. There's not really much you can say. You just have to wait and find out. And Tetlock demonstrated that was far from true. Like you can get really great accuracy. Now, very, very few humans can do it, and they have to do it in specific ways, as you were discussing in the last segment. But it does work, and those accuracy scores are good. And then the evidence from Google's internal prediction market was the same. You look at that calibration chart. When Google employees betting with each other was ended with a 35% chance of something happening, it tended to happen 35% of the time. And that's just astounding to me. When I was looking at that data, I could not believe that you could actually do that.
Like the collective wisdom or the collective forecasting capability of a lot of human minds is quite powerful. Obviously, two heads are better than one, but in this case, you're talking about thousands of minds. In a way, it is a kind of super intelligence or an artificial intelligence because you're harnessing the forecasting capability of a lot of different individuals. So that's not a natural thing. And it would be likely, or I think reasonable, to expect that to outperform an individual. The Yeah, this is super conversation. I'm enjoying it. I like the fact that you can root this all back in Tetlock because I'm a fan. I think more people should know about the super forecasting methodology. But one thing about Tetlock is that his forecasters are successful or expert in one domain. And it's very rare to find someone who can accurately forecast across multiple domains. Now, with artificial intelligence, it seems to me, once the AI has been trained on how to do fairly good reasoning and how to, kind of evaluate the sources so it makes good decisions, maybe there's work to be done there still, but it will be able to apply that broadly across multiple domains, not limited to a single domain. Is that something that you are observing? Was that one of the inspirations for starting FutureSearch?
Yeah, so I was the CTO of Metaculus. My co-founder Lawrence Phillips was the head of AI there, and we were looking at these AI forecasts with the platform and trying to figure out how to make them more accurate. We were looking at really hard questions. The single most popular Metaculus question is about the arrival date of AGI. Um, in the subsequent years, that's become even more trendy. That question was originally written, in 2017 or 2018. The platform Metaculus was started in 2015. It even predates Tetlock's book Super Forecasters. So people have been trying to use the collective human wisdom to answer this question: what's going to happen with AI, for years now. And we were not satisfied. Lawrence and I were looking at those human forecasts that were being aggregated, all the scoring methodology, the math behind it, the kind of forecast elicitation, the research people were doing. And we just became convinced that this could not be done without AI assistance. Like the human frontier was not good enough to tell us what was going to happen in AI. And that's what Lawrence and I really wanted to know. We would get hung up on these details. So something like, when is GPT-5 going to come out? One of the things you might want to think about for when GPT-5 is going to come out is what's going on with China, because to what extent is OpenAI racing? Now, since we asked that question, things have changed a lot. I think OpenAI is much more concerned about Anthropic and Google now than it is about, Baidu and Tencent and DeepSeek. Although I don't know. I mean, it's quite complicated. But the moment that you ask that question, the moment that you think that U.S.-China relations is relevant, you just open this whole Pandora's box of complexity that no human could grapple with. You're suddenly looking at, okay, there's all these export controls. Like, which ones are in effect? Which ones are actually useful? If those semiconductors are actually restricted, how much does that slow down their research? Okay. If the semiconductors are slowing down their research, how much of that is known by the leadership of OpenAI? Are they taking that into account? And just on and on and on and on and on. The idea that a human could sit down just with a pencil and paper and just kind of reason through that, we talk to our forecasters and they would say, look, I've got a tiny angle on this, I've got a little bit of an intuition, and we just kind of hope by having 1,000 of them that the signal would come out. But on the hardest questions, the evidence suggests that the forecasts are much less accurate. Forecasting the future of technology is unbelievably hard, as I'm sure you know, Robert, better than most. So we said, okay, we need more. We need more intelligence. And of course, the source of new intelligence is not throw more humans at the problem. It's put some AI on it, and that's where we are now.
But it's not just a quantitative change, more AI versus throwing more humans at the problem. I think what you're suggesting here is there's a qualitative change as well. When you have a machine intelligence, it's actually going to perform that function in a way that humans would not. Even a collection of human minds could not, because human minds don't think that way. Is that your observation, and was that the inspiration for starting your company?
Absolutely. It was quite clear that talking to GPT-4, even in the early GPT-4 days, was like talking to a whole group of people. And if the core insight from forecasting is don't just do one person, do multiple people, and also pick people who are actually good at it, GPT-4 is kind of like a hive mind. When we were looking at it, it was kind of like talking to 1,000 people. It just knew absolutely everything. Yeah. If you can have one intelligence that has the breadth of 1,000 or even 1,000,000 humans, and you know that breadth of knowledge is useful in forecasting, well, then it's just obvious. You got to try to see if GPT-4 can forecast. But again, we were not the only ones to run experiments to see how well GPT-4 could predict the future when it came out. And the answer was it was terrible. And so it became basically an engineering and a research and an AI problem to say, look, the seed, like the potential is clearly there, as we know from human forecasting. Like it has the knowledge and the ability to do the research that could make superhuman forecasting possible with an AI. But somebody has to go build it, and that's what we're doing.
Now, in the beginning of the show, you mentioned that there's a limited time where humans will be able to outperform AI, and even at this stage, taken on an individual basis, AI is going to outperform just about anybody on most tasks. We might still, one or two of us might still be able to outperform on a particular set of tasks. But broadly speaking, AI is already at a point where it can outthink us and outperform us and do so faster and more accurately than we can do in most domains. But at the beginning of the show, you said that that's coming to an end, that at some point in the near future, you forecast or you believe that artificial intelligence will outperform all humans in all categories. Am I restating your assumption correctly, or maybe I got it wrong?
Well, I was making the slightly narrower claim that I think AI unassisted will outperform human forecasters pretty soon. Forecasting is kind of like the most, elite form of intelligence, because to predict the future, you basically have to model the entire world. If you're going to answer any forecasting question, you have to understand science and philosophy and culture and geopolitics and economics and everything else. So when I say AI will outperform humans in forecasting, I'm kind of making the claim that AI will outperform humans on everything. Mm-hmm. But I am talking just about basically making probabilistic statements about the future and then scoring them.
I admire your constraint. That's good, because we've had many folks on the show who make very broad, sweeping claims that I think are unsupportable. they're kind of extrapolating from what they know in one domain, and they're saying, well, that's going to happen across the board. And I like to remind those folks that there are many, many things that humans do that machines cannot do and will not do anytime soon. Just consider the people that build your house or repair your house or do the plumbing in your house or the electricity and so forth. There are a lot of tasks that humans are quite capable of, and frankly, we're very good at. And robots and AI are not yet able to do those things. And it may be possible in the future, but even then, it might not be economically feasible to replace human workers for a lot of those tasks.
Yeah,
I
I'll give
bring
you
that up.
a big example there, which is
Yeah.
talking to people. One of the things that a great forecaster will do in order to make a great forecast is go talk to people who are subject matter experts or insiders and see what they say. ChatGPT can summon up an email client and email a professor of microbiology and ask them a question, but I don't think they're going to get a response. Whereas a human could reach out to them and have a plausible chance of getting that. So the legwork of forecasting is actually still solidly in the human camp, and it's not clear how drawing from other humans is going to be something that an AI system is going to be able to do autonomously. So I very much agree. Like operating in the real world, humans have many advantages, and we're not close to all of those advantages just going to zero across every industry. Maybe in a long time, unless we have some sort of super intelligent explosion.
I think it's important for people to hear that. We recently had a guest on who I disagreed with quite strongly because he made the very facile claim that within a couple of years, humans won't. I think to summarize, probably unfairly to summarize what he was trying to say, is that in a few years, machine intelligence will be so advanced that there'll be no work left for humans. And again, I'm probably being unfair. I don't know if he made that exact claim, but you do hear that quite often, right? In the tech trades and in Silicon Valley, this kind of euphoria about this moment in time that seems to be just around the corner, but it's always just around the corner. It never seems to get quite here. And that at that time, magically, machines will be able to outperform us across the board in every human function, and therefore, there'll be no jobs left for humans. And I think that therefore part is a huge assumption that is probably incorrect. Like, in other words, I don't lose any sleep about humans losing their jobs anytime soon. I noticed that it's extremely hard to hire people right now in the United States. We are very close to full employment. There are a lot of unfilled jobs. And here we have the smartest minds in the country in the technology industry, and they're speculating about the fact that there'll be no jobs for humans in the near future. I can't get those two things to reconcile in my mind. Can you share your perspectives on that lively topic?
Yeah, that's a great point, and I mostly agree with you, Robert. I think I'll try to make I guess what I would call the Steelman case for how that could actually happen. But one of the truisms among the forecasting community is if you just get a forecasting question, you should just say no. Like nothing ever happens. Like almost any question you get, this is even shown in platforms. The one that I built and ran at Google and on Metaculus, like 70% of questions, like will this happen by this date? For any this, the answer is no. So I think having a kind of a status quo prior is just a very healthy epistemic disposition to have as a forecaster. Um, as a Silicon Valley person, as a technologist, as somebody working on AI and trying to make it more capable, I am very interested in these claims that we will have an intelligence explosion or some sort of superhuman thing that can do everything. I only see one plausible way under which that would happen, and that's in the AI 2027 scenario that I encourage your audience to check out. It's a very specific path. Step one, AI gets very, very good at software engineering. Now, this is very plausible because AI is already pretty good at software engineering. Now, software engineering is only, I don't know, 1% of the economy, so you might say, what's the big deal? But most of the development of AI at AI companies is being done by software engineers. So if software engineering becomes 10 times more productive or 10 times faster, then the next iteration of the AI model should be coming that much sooner. And there's a bit of a feedback loop there because as it gets smarter, it will be an even better software engineer. So that's step one. Step two is having AI good at doing AI research. Now, a lot of AI research is software. You have to write experiment code, you have to train new models, you have to release them, get feedback from humans. But a lot of research is just research. It's just thinking about like what's the best algorithm? Like where am I going to get the best training data? Like what did this experiment tell me? Right now, AI is not very good at these things. But as it gets better at software, we're expecting it to get better at research. Once it gets better at research, again, there's a positive feedback loop. The research is done a little bit faster, so the next generation of the model comes out a little bit sooner, which makes it a little bit faster to do the next set of research to generate the next model, et cetera, et cetera. Once you have a very, very good AI researcher, then the further claim is that this can be used to train an AI that is good at things that are not just done at AI companies. And this would be doing law, doing medicine, doing accounting, maybe even designing robots to build your house for you, like in your example of maybe the last form of human labor. So That's basically a story for which this could happen. It requires three pretty strong assumptions that have to happen in sequence. So even if this story does unfold, our forecast in AI 2027 is that this, even if this happens, would be something that would be at the earliest in the mid 2030s. We were kind of the dissenting view in AI 2027, which lays out the case that in fact this could happen all at once. That first step of automating software and then automating AI research and then automating everything else could happen in as short as a few years.
Hmm.
As forecasters, we couldn't rule that out. Like it might have a realistic chance, maybe a 2 or 5% chance of happening that quick. Our median scenario is that it takes much longer. But if you agree with that model and that premise, you can actually see a path towards that very, grandiloquent future. Yeah, again, Robert, I think I mostly agree with you. I don't see that coming anytime soon. But it's not impossible, and I wouldn't reject it out of hand.
Right. So there, I guess what I'm missing, my blind spot there is that notion of the AI increasing in its ability to produce better AI, right? So the ability for it to engineer a better version of itself. I'm well familiar with the idea that artificial intelligence is writing software. That's well understood right now. But that second implication, then, that if it can write better software, then it can conduct better AI research, then it's going to start to improve itself. And it is true, these systems operate at very high speed. And so that result could happen much quicker than someone like me, a skeptic like me, might predict or expect. If you don't mind, I want to circle back to a thing we talked about a moment ago, because it occurred to me when you're speaking, but I didn't want to interrupt you. I live in Los Angeles. I deal with a lot of people in the motion picture industry and the media industry in general. And of course, as you know, there's a lot of resistance there to AI for a whole bunch of reasons. There's a kind of moral outrage right now that AIs have been trained on the work of human beings. So really, the literary and artistic output of hundreds of people, millions of people, has been used without permission to train artificial intelligence. I'm going to leave that issue aside right now, because what I want to do is make an observation about it. The artists that I work with, the people in the entertainment industry who embrace artificial intelligence, they have a slightly different perspective on that. I think there's a meaningful distinction here to emphasize, and that is, when you work with artificial intelligence, you are engaging with the collective intelligence of humanity. In other words, it's not a replacement for humanity. It's a quick access to all the knowledge and wisdom and insight that humans have gathered over centuries. It's all there. It's been trained on everything. And as a result, when you're working with AI, you're kind of communing with the general intelligence of humanity, or the wisdom of the elders, is the way one of my friends put it. And I thought that was a nice way to think of it. Certainly, that's a more artistic interpretation. When I say that, what do you think about that? Is that true? Is this like basically just the next iteration of collective human intelligence?
I absolutely agree with that. I think that's a poignant insight. And again, I think it's really at the heart of forecasting. Forecasting requires an incredible depth of knowledge. And that depth often comes through breadth. You just have to read everything. In forecasting tournaments, there would be some question about, Russia, Ukraine, or the Red Sea, or Israel, or something. And the forecasters would just go to the library and get a book on the history of the Israel-Palestine conflict and sit and read it for a couple of days. And then they would come back and say, okay, here's my take on this. We don't need to do that anymore because all of that knowledge is in the model. Yeah. If you wanted to talk to collective humanity, the wisdom of our elders, it's right there on ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, available for free 24 hours a day. It is a true forecasting superpower. And that's why for me, when this AI revolution started, I looked to my domain and said, this is going to change. If you're working on, say, medicine, and maybe it's a very open question, or the music industry or entertainment, like to what role will AI be making movies for us or recording music? I have no idea. Like you could have different takes on that, or whether it's even ethical to do so, like you said, using all that copyrighted material. In medicine, it's far from clear how useful AI is going to be in diagnostics or therapeutics. But in forecasting, this ability to talk to collective humanity and synthesize basically compress everything that humanity knows about, say, China, into something where you can just get all of the information at your fingertips, that's clearly a superpower. And so that meant that my field of forecasting was going to get disrupted, and that meant it was time to go do it with AI as a startup. So again, I can't generalize necessarily to other domains, but I think that's a very deep insight and something that even now, a couple of years into the ChatGPT era, people are still learning.
Just about every industry, certainly the media industries I know so well, are governed by this, what we call the iron triangle, which is, your budget or money, time, and quality. And within those three domains, you're going to try to optimize. And very often what happens is you're on a timeline. So the timeline is set, the data is set. So you're kind of working against the clock. You don't have much flexibility on timeline. And budgets are usually set. So within the constraints of budget and time, you opt for the best quality you can achieve. And certainly that would be a fair summary of almost every media product that's out there. Now, what we're observing when we work with AI in the media business, what we're able to do is get results much, much faster. So if we want a lot of ideas, we can generate thousands more ideas much faster. So what's happening is we're able to extend time. You get more time, essentially, or you get results faster, and you can take that gain in time and invest it in better quality. And I think this observation is a lot of people in Los Angeles are missing this right now. Like that is a gigantic unlock for the creative process. They tend to view AI as a threat that's going to replace human workers in the motion picture business. And there's no doubt there will be job loss because you'll be able to do more with fewer people. That's a certainty. Like that will be one of the promises of AI. But in a way, that helps you extend that other criteria, that other constraint, which is budget, right? So fewer people means you can do more with less money. Those two things can be reinvested in quality. And so what I'm starting to see in the entertainment business, quality is going to be more optionality and more aesthetic choices that the director or the creative person can make a decision about. Do you see that broadly? I mean, I'm thinking that in your line of work, you're dealing with something similar, right? So anytime an organization is asked to make a forecast or a prediction, you do run into the constraints of how much data is available, or how many research reports can we digest in a certain period of time. We have to deliver the report in a timely way because there's time value to the information we're going to provide. And so those become constraints that are going to dictate the quality that you can achieve within those two variables. Tell me a little bit about how AI changes that for you, quality versus the quality of the output versus time and budget.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you a specific example that might illuminate this. So, one of the tasks that we have in Deep Research Bench is called Find Original Source. And what it does is it takes a claim on the web and tries to track it down to its original source. Now, sometimes this is easy because if you're looking at, mainstream high quality reporting, when there's a claim made, there's generally a link, and you follow the link, and that will generally be the primary source. But the vast majority of the web is not the reporting quality of the New York Times, and so people make claims all the time that either don't have that link or link to something that is itself a secondary source, or have the link but misstate the claim that it was in that link. One thing you can do with AI to kind of mess with this time constraint or the amount of money you put in, imagine you've got 3 paragraphs of text that are explaining a decision or a forecast. Go to every sentence and say, what assumptions or claims are implied in the sentence? For every one of those, track down the original source of that claim or assumption, and then do this recursively. If you find something somewhere on the web, where did that come from? Keep chasing it down. You can spawn a very large number of web research agents to go trace down the original source and verify basically every single fact in a piece of writing. And you can do that for pennies on the dollar. Now, it might cost the AI system many dollars or tens of dollars to do this, but humans would cost thousands or tens of thousands of dollars to do this amount of work.
Plus, that cost is coming down as the cost of compute goes down. So in 2 years, it'll be a lot cheaper.
Cost it is coming down, but the quality is going up, and the quality matters. And so it can still, I don't know, we have runs at FutureSearch that cost many tens of dollars. Sometimes, for example, we will do something that requires looking at every single company in the S&P 500. So we will have research agents, several of them for each company in the S&P 500 that are all researching something. Those costs can be measured in hundreds or thousands of dollars. Again, still orders of magnitude cheaper than if humans were doing it. But the main thing is, how do you productively use that intelligence in the AI and its research capabilities to answer a question that you care about? As a human, you would never say, well, I'll go look into see what the impact of tariffs is on every single company in the S&P 500.
Yeah,
But
how
for an
could
AI
you?
system, that's a great question to ask.
Yeah,
You can
that's true.
actually do that if you have the right
Yeah.
infrastructure and the scale that FutureSearch has. So I don't think I have a great answer to the resolution of the iron triangle, other than to say it requires creativity. Like AI, it is the collective wisdom of humans, but it is its own different beast. It is kind of an alien that operates in different ways and surprising ways and has different trade-offs of quality and time and money than humans. But if you're smart about the way to kind of break down your problem, then you can deploy these things at scale to do things that a human would never be able to do while still kind of leaving the core of it to the human and get a massive quality improvement pretty cheaply.
So what I'm hearing you describe is there's still a role for a human being there in terms of directing the AI to do the useful research. The grunt work of the research can certainly be done by the machine. Dan, let me ask you a related question because this is one of the areas where human forecasting has failed, notoriously. Most humans like to think that they can extrapolate from any trend. Now we're not always as good as we think, and also that's a very dangerous thing to do because trends never unfold in a linear path the way we tend to assume. But we like to think that we can say, okay, if all else holds true, this particular trend, I can kind of predict the trajectory of that trend. But what we're notoriously bad at is answering the question, then what happens? In other words, what are the second and third order consequences of a very obvious trend that we all think we can predict the future of? And humans are terrible at this. I mean, we see this in politics constantly. We see this in geopolitics constantly, where, one nation or another makes a move on the global chessboard, and then there's a series, a kind of cascade of consequences that occur. And you think to yourself, didn't they think about that before they started bombing or before they did the invasion or whatever, egregious blunder was made? In some cases, they don't care. The leaders of the country do not care because they just want to deal with this thing at hand, and they're not worried about the future consequences, or they'll figure they'll deal with them later. But in some ways, this creates so much collateral damage, so much economic hardship, that I often pine for that. And I think, I wish that humans were better at thinking about long-term consequences, because that would probably cause us to think twice about making the drastic move that we're tempted to make. Do you think machine intelligence is better at forecasting and anticipating second and third order consequences?
Certainly not today, but of course that's the direction that we hope it will go. Yeah, I think that is a great point, and it's actually one of the risks of AI is whenever something looks like a time series forecast. That stuff, even before language models, was firmly in the territory of machine learning. There's all sorts of time series algorithms, and they're used a million times a day in many businesses, generally for things like supply chain forecasting. Like, I need to know how many parts I'm going to have. I need to know how long they're going to be on the shelves. I need to know when they're going to go out the door. I need to plan for, say, Christmas holiday shopping, and the surge in demand there, and make sure I've got enough inventory and enough distribution. All of that stuff just looks like taking a very dense set of data that has a trend line and then extrapolating it. And you say, well, the last three Christmases, we had a 40% bump. So I predicted this Christmas will have a 40% bump, and that can be a very good forecast. And you look at that methodology, and it kind of gives you this false confidence that you can use that to figure out things that have these second or third order consequences, exactly as you're describing, Robert. One of the things I was interested in at Google with the prediction market I had was trying to see if we could forecast basically the chip economy better. And this one was time series kind of supply chain forecasting. They did it the same way that most other large companies do. And they broke it into two different categories. They called it inorganic and organic forecasting. The thing called organic forecasting, they said, was time series. Just like, well, what happened last year? Predict that will happen this year. Add 20% because it's growing. It's probably right. And then the thing called inorganic forecasting was everything else. While I was there, the big thing that was in the inorganic forecasting was COVID-19. There was a global pandemic that destroyed all the supply chains, and nobody's chips were going into their servers, into their data centers on time. Every single model fell on its head and died and became useless when that happened. And so they had to pull in all the humans and say, well, okay, every model we have of our chip supply chain is wrong. So what should we actually do? And the ML basically got thrown out, and it was only up to the humans to kind of make those adjustments. I think one of the big challenges is that synthesis. Like, the ML was useful in some ways. If you trust it too much when COVID happens, you're completely out of luck. But you can't just replace it with an army of humans, because most of the time it's not COVID. And so these kind of, as Taleb would say, the black swans, or as you said, kind of the second order consequences.
Yeah.
I think anybody has a good practice of adopting those into like a standardized forecasting process. Yeah, I think that's still an
Okay, fair enough. Like we haven't, maybe we haven't quite gotten there yet, but how would you approach that? I mean, how would you have, would you do like a second run of your forecast once you've got a scenario or a range of scenarios posited? Could you then apply like a black swan filter to it and say, okay, now give me now reevaluate those outcomes and show me some of the possible consequences? Do you think that that's going to be something that we can possibly do? Because I mean, honestly, that would be an enormous unlock, because I think this is one of the big blind spots of humanity.
Absolutely. I'm not confident. It's definitely doable. I have not seen anybody do it well, but I basically believe it's possible because, again, it leads into the strengths of AIs. So if you've got your team of human forecasters, so like, hey, am I going to get all my NVIDIA chips in my data center? They can't think of everything. They can maybe think of 4 or 5 scenarios and work them out in detail, and then that will be the end of the hours that they have to work on the problem. If you have an AI system that has the type of judgment necessary to go through those scenarios, you can consider 100 scenarios or 1,000
Yeah.
scenarios. You could be doing in early 2020 what no human was doing, which is forecasting with the impact of a pandemic on your supply chain. Nobody was thinking about that scenario until it happened. But an
The
AI
funny
can
thing
do
about
that.
that is COVID-19, although, it did come very quickly, we had forecasts of a global pandemic, including a global pandemic that involved coronaviruses coming from the Wuhan region, right? This was not a surprise to anyone that was working in epidemiology. They had been forecasting that for 20 years. So it's kind of funny to me that that never came into the scenario planning for the supply chain. It never folded into scenario planning for national security or for public health. I actually take that back because the good public health organizations were quite aware of it. They were sometimes stymied in their response. But it's interesting, right? That's an example of something that was actually well predicted and well understood, and the dynamics of its spread were well understood in advance. I don't think everyone believed it. Maybe it was a small number of people who understood it, and they didn't have a platform to get the information out. But it wouldn't be accurate to say that like no one knew that there would be a COVID-19 pandemic when, in fact, a coronavirus-born pandemic coming from the Wuhan region was something that many, many, many people in epidemiology had been thinking about for years and discussing. It was fairly well understood. So here we have a different problem, which is the Cassandra problem, which is that you can be, outside the temple and making absolutely accurate forecasts that nobody listens to because they're politically uncomfortable or inconvenient. Do you run into that in your line of work? I mean, are there forecasts that you make or where you feel like, 100% accurate forecast, a possibility, but it lands with a thud because it's not the answer people wanted to hear?
Well, of course, timing is everything in forecasting. And yes, the epidemiological community did predict that there would be global pandemics like the COVID-19 one, even as you say, possibly with a coronavirus specifically. But there were many other hypotheses of other types of viruses, and it could have happened at any time. One interesting detail is I learned about COVID from Metaculus, years before I was the CTO there. That was, a forecasting platform was actually one of the only places on the internet where people were actively engaged in trying to figure out what was going on with this weird virus in China. This was like late January, early February 2020. It kind of seeped its way to the various parts of the internet like months before it became a mainstream thing. But I was able to actually cancel a trip to Hawaii to go to a wedding because I saw stuff on forecasting platforms that was not in the news anywhere. None of my colleagues were talking about it at work. Like it was just a thing that the niche forecasting community had picked up on. So timing is interesting because you have to time the forecast, but also things sometimes unfold slowly over time. And there was the whole period from late December of 2019 through mid-February of 2020 where people who were quite savvy knew what was happening and the rest of the world was totally oblivious. Yeah, I will say one more interesting case for pandemics is cyber attacks. This is something where every professional in the cybersecurity community is worried that basically all of our hospital systems, all of our power transmission lines, like large companies, are completely and utterly unready for like a very serious state-sponsored hack, and have been trumpeting this for many years. My prediction is it's going to be like COVID, is that they're going to turn out to be right. Like that is going to happen. There's going to be an absolutely devastating cyber attack, maybe sometime in the next 5 to 10 years, that takes a whole country or a whole hospital system or the financial system or a tech company completely offline, causes billions or maybe even trillions of dollars in damages. And all the people who are professionals in that community said, I've been telling you this is going to happen and telling you to prepare for this for decades, and nobody listened. And all the people who could have done something about it saying, yeah, well, there were a lot of other things I was worried about. You didn't tell me when it was going to happen. And it's very expensive to protect against that type of thing.
That's right.
So I think the moral of the story here is like forecasting alone isn't enough, because even if you have the forecast, what are you going to do about it?
This is the challenge, right? You can actually develop highly sophisticated, accurate forecasting and still not be able to influence the political debate or the economic decision making. Dan, put on your forecasting hat for a moment as we come to the end of the show here, and tell me what you think the world's going to look like in the next 10 or 20 years, based on what you're seeing, this convergence of technologies and the rapid iteration and improvement, and particularly in machine intelligence and its ability to do forecasting. What do you think the world's going to be like? Will we have much better perspectives on the future as a society? Will this improve our ability to collective decision make or not?
I think it will. Obviously, I'm biased because I'm orienting my career around it, and doing it as a startup, not as a think tank or a research lab, because I think this is $1 billion opportunity. So of course I'm biased. The forecasters that we have at FutureSearch might give you a more calibrated view than me as the CEO. But yes, I think forecasting is unbelievably valuable, and it has been proven out in the literature. And you absolutely can use AI to make it much better, faster, cheaper. Ask all the questions you never wanted. You never had humans that you could ask to answer those questions before. But it takes time. So if you're asking me about the 2030s or 2040s, I would predict quite strongly that we'll look back to this time and say, wow, we were living in the dark ages. Like, we knew how to predict things and we weren't doing it at all. People were just using their gut to make all the decisions in government and in business and academia. No one was forecasting like which scientific paths would work better. Nobody was forecasting, cyber attacks and pandemics. People weren't forecasting the outcomes of mergers. They weren't forecasting the outcomes of, bombing Iran or whatever is going on right now with Israel, Iran. Everyone was just using their gut and just guessing, and all of society was run that way. And once we have better technology to do this, we'll never look back. In the same way that the scientific method has completely changed something like medicine, where medicine was just kind of like doctors just did whatever they felt like. They didn't really have evidence behind anything they were doing. We lived that way for hundreds of years. And very recently, doctors now do stuff that is actually supported by the science. The science of forecasting is turning online as well. I think heads of state, CEOs, once that technology becomes available, they will use it. And I kind of understand why they don't use it today, because it's not very accessible. But I think we will look back on this as a total dark age for humanity, where we were just blundering towards the future with absolutely no plan, no foresight, no real idea what was going on. And we will think it was like a total crime that we were operating this way.
Let's hope that the humans can evolve the ability to listen to the forecast and make intelligent decisions based on that information.
Yeah.
Well, Dan, it's been a pleasure having you on the show today. I've enjoyed this conversation immensely. Where can people find out more information about you and about FutureSearch.ai?
Yeah, well, it's at FutureSearch.ai. Thank you, Robert, for having me. It's been a great conversation. Yeah, I would encourage people, if they want to see what's going on with the future of AI itself and how AI can help you understand that, FutureSearch.ai. We've got evals, we've got reports, and software coming out soon.
Cool. Thanks for being on the show. And folks who are listening, you've been listening to Dan Schwarz, the CEO and co-founder of FutureSearch.ai. I'm Rob Tercek from The Futurists, and every week, Brett King and I will bring you another person who's thinking about and shaping the future. We enjoy this process so much, and we're also getting such a kick out of the messages and the comments that we get back from people. Thank you. Keep sending that information to us. I want to mention one thing that's happening in September. I'm thrilled to tell you that we'll be doing a live event in Dubai. Brett has been working very hard to organize this event with the sponsorship of MasterCard. We will be bringing together some of the world's best futurist forecasters and future thinkers for a live event, a 2-day event in Dubai at the famous Jumeirah Beach Hotel there, a very fabulous place. If you're interested, you can learn more about that at futuristevent.com. And I'm looking forward to seeing you there in person if you can make it. And if you can't, well, I'll see you in the future on the Futurist podcast. Thanks, Dan. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Robert.
Well, that's it for The Futurists this week. If you like the show, we sure hope you did. Please subscribe and share it with the people in your community. And don't forget to leave us a 5-star review. That really helps other people find the show. And you can ping us anytime on Instagram and Twitter at Futurist Podcast for the folks that you'd like to see on the show or the questions that you'd like us to ask. Thanks for joining. And as always, we'll see you in the future.